Association of Flight Attendants President Sara Nelson is now joining us to discuss the latest developments on COVID relief for the airline industry. Outstanding to have you taking the time to join us here on the News Wrap. My many thanks to you. We did get some more details released today on that $908 billion bipartisan proposal here on Capitol Hill. And airlines would receive $17 billion for what amounts to 4 months worth of payroll support. How could this help thousands of aviation workers across the country return to work? This is really important for your industry, especially at this time.
Well, look, this is not stimulus. This is emergency relief, and this is a bridge to get us to a new Congress, a new administration where we can talk about stimulus. But we have some serious funding deadlines at the end of this month. The CARES Act is going to close out all of its unemployment for gig workers, part-time workers. 12 million people are going to fall off unemployment the day after Christmas. 30 to 40 million are at risk of eviction. And the people that I represent are caught right up in this because as of October, the job protections that we had that were started in March and concluded on September 30th, when everybody thought and hoped that we would be in a place of recovery, those expired. And so we have tens of thousands who are out on furlough, but even more who are going without a paycheck, over 100,000 workers, and there's no moratorium on that anymore. While the airlines are about 40% demand, revenue is about a half of that. So airlines are operating at about 25% revenue of what they were a year before. If you take all the financial crises of the airline industry over the last 100 years and roll them all up together, it's not even near to what this pandemic is creating right now. So we need this federal relief in order to keep these jobs in place and the critical infrastructure. And it's even more important right now as we're ramping up and thinking about the distribution of the vaccine, because it's going to take all of those jumbo jets getting back up in the air in order to meet the demand on that.
Okay, so Sara, you just mentioned there an interesting point that I want to go back to. You mentioned the last 100 years of the airline industry. You just laid out the argument to say everything that our industry has faced for the last century does not compare now. I think the sort of obvious go-to in the heads of a lot of viewers would say, well, clearly your industry took a disproportionate impact in the months, perhaps even the years after September 11th, back in 2001. Can you give us some sort of either compare or contrast versus what the industry went through in the fall of 2001 into 2002 versus how dire you see the circumstance being for the industry today?
Yeah, well, let's be really clear. After 9/11, which was a one-day event, we were building back right away. And there was a sustained harm to the demand on air travel, but there was a build back. Right now, we're in the middle of the crisis. And as cases surge, the concern around travel is growing. So CDC is saying it's important to avoid travel. That means that business travel is essentially non-existent. That's why even though you see the demand around 40%, the revenues are half of that because we don't have any of that business travel money coming in. So after 9/11, the industry took an immediate hit of about 20 to 30% in demand. That was one day, and we were building back from there. This is a sustained crisis. We're about to head into a year now, because don't forget that the airline industry was the first one in. We're likely to be the last one out as we were traveling to Asia, and we cut back those flights starting in January of this past year.
Absolutely. And that's great perspective through the lens of history for people who just remember the last 2 decades. So I appreciate you being willing to answer that. For people who are looking at a potential price tag or anything in the tune of $17 billion, more or less, help us understand what are those main priorities for your industry? Are they for payroll? Are they to avoid unnecessary furloughs? Are they for further fortification of other parts of the operation, perhaps that may not be intuitive to consumers who simply fly on airplanes without actually knowing how the industry works as well as you do? Where does that money go to, and how does it get prioritized?
So here's the great thing. We're 80% organized in the U.S. airline industry. And in March, we said this is only going to work if it's workers focused. So in March, there was a shoring up of the industry. There was a 97% drop off of demand overnight. And the airlines were not prepared for that. They didn't have any chance to pull airplanes down or to be able to respond to that immediate crisis. So there was an operational component of the relief that happened then. But half of the relief in March was only for payroll support. This is what we're talking about extending. We're not talking about the operational costs. We're only talking about keeping people connected to their jobs. So what it required in March was that $25 billion went to cover 70% of the payroll. A part of that was turned into loans so that the large carriers were only covering about 50% of the payroll. But in return, they said that they would not furlough anyone. They would keep everyone connected to their jobs, connected to their healthcare, and continued service to all the communities. We also said that we wanted to cap executive compensation and ban stock buybacks and dividends. So this is the exact opposite of what most people think of as a bailout. This was actually a jobs and infrastructure plan. And we also capped the things that people hate the worst about corporate bailouts, with it, which is executive bonuses and shares and an increase of advantage for the shareholders.
Sara, while I have you, the world of business travel specifically has been upended here in 2020. I'm not talking about family vacations and things like that, but business travel. I think a lot of major corporations and companies, both big and small, have recognized we could do a lot of our work through distance, through Zoom, basically. And so perhaps that, it may end up having a long-term impact on the airline industry as corporations realize maybe we don't need to spend the money that we historically have to send our employees crisscrossing the country. Does the industry, you think, need to sort of rethink its long-term strategy on this or any other permanent impact in a post-pandemic future?
So first of all, it's going to take a little while to build all the way back up to scale, but by the time we hit next summer, we should be running at between 70 and 85% of what we were a year ago, especially if we move forward on a plan to contain the virus and get the vaccine out. And we're able to get this payroll support in place so that we can meet that demand. And we're going to be a little bit smaller industry, but some people have decided to retire early, and we can probably weather that storm if we get this bridge of emergency relief. I have to tell you, though, all this talk about companies saying they're going to cut back on travel expenses and not have people traveling as much, I know that's real. But our experience in the past with airlines is that anytime technology improves, people can be more connected by technology, it only makes them want to travel more. And I know for sure the first time somebody gets a deal because they went there in person, everybody else is going to follow too. So we're not worried about that at all. We think it's going to come roaring back.
I'll say, as a campaign reporter, nothing quite takes the place of actually getting on an airplane and heading into a place like we hopefully will be doing soon in the great state of Georgia. You're right, there's a lot of work you have to do on the ground itself. We need to leave it there. Sara Nelson, Associate of Flight Attendants President. Thanks a lot for being here, Sara. Really important issue, and I wish you and your colleagues the